Welcome to Veritate with your host, Johnny Mack, a podcast that will dive deep into the pursuit of truth in a world filled with noise, confusion, and fleeting opinions. We will seek to uncover the eternal, unshakable truths that shape our lives and our beliefs, from faith and philosophy to history and culture. We'll explore the questions that matter, challenge the answers we've been given, and seek the wisdom that has stood the test of time. So join Johnny Mack in this journey to discover what's real, what's right, and what's true.
Welcome back to Veritate, and I'm your host, Johnny Mack. We are continuing our search of the questions, and today we're looking at Confucianism and Shintoism. I want to remind everyone that I spent 24 years in the military, 4 years in the Marine Corps, 20 years in the Army. And a man who's lived under authority for most of his adult life, it does make him very skeptical of any invisible authority. So when I first enlisted into the Marine Corps, I didn't question the chain of command because orders would come down and consequences were real for not following orders. The results were always measurable, and if a leader was incompetent, people would suffer because of that. And if the discipline broke down, missions failed and reality had weight to it. So when I later heard that religious people speak about God, faith, heaven, and sin, it really felt abstract to me. And not because I hated God. I didn't feel wounded by any religion. I just simply didn't see a necessity of it. I assumed that morality could be trained. I thought that order could be enforced. I thought civilization could function without invoking heaven. So that was my operating assumption. And so when I began to look at all of the world's religions, remember, this was from the perspective of a practical atheist, not somebody that was raging against belief, somebody who was just testing it. I was not trying to find Christ. I was just trying to see if there was any worldview that could survive interrogation. And that's basically how the framework of the questions was born. Who is God? Who is man? What went wrong? And how's it fixed? Because every system has to answer those questions. Because if it can't define God clearly, then it will drift. And if it can't define man accurately, it's going to misdiagnose the problem. And if it can't explain what went wrong, then it can't offer a solution. And if it can't explain how it's fixed, then it will be incomplete. So we've already walked through some of the different world's religions. And I had them in order for a purpose, but we walked through Taoism, which showed a mystical flow of harmony without a personal creator. Then Hinduism, with its pantheon of gods and reincarnation and karma and cosmic cycles. Then to Buddhism, where desire is the root of suffering, and extinguishing desire, where if you extinguish the desire, you extinguish the suffering. We looked at Islam and Judaism, and these are very monotheistic faith. They have law, they have revelation, they have command. And again, I placed those first for a reason. But now, last week, we looked at Zoroastrianism. And that was really the first system that forced me to confront evil seriously. This battle between light and darkness. This final judgment and moral accountability beyond death. But after Zoroaster, something had shifted in me. Because up to that point, I had been analyzing religions largely based on metaphysical claims. But I began to ask something that was more grounded. And that was, what if the human problem is not a rebellion? What if it's something much simpler than that? What if it's just an issue of disorder? And I thought, what if religion exists primarily just to stabilize civilization? And it was that question that led me into Confucianism and then naturally into Shintoism. And here's the reason I had to combine those. And it's because that both of these systems attempt to build order without centering any form of salvation. Both of them do attempt to preserve harmony without demanding any surrender to a singular or a personal creator. Both of them did shape entire civilizations, and both of these appealed deeply to the version of me that believed morality didn't require God. But I want to be clear about that, because at that stage, I still just believed that religion was evolutionary sociology, that humans developed myths to stabilize tribes, that ethical codes preserved cooperation, that there was ritual that was built on identity, and that was just a working theory. And Confucianism fit that theory perfectly. And so did Shintoism. And that's why I had to place them together. Not because they're identical in any way, but structurally they belong in the same category, such as the civilizational frameworks, their harmony-based systems, the order without redemption. But as in all things, you have to test them. And so from Confucianism comes from Confucius. He lived during the political fragmentation in China. There was warring states at the time. There was a lot of corrupt rulers. Confucius, however, though, was not a prophet. He didn't claim revelation from heaven. He claimed that wisdom was rooted in tradition, and he wanted order restored. And that alone is the reason why he resonated with me. Because when your institutions decay, you don't need mysticism, you need discipline. And Confucius, he taught about Tian, which is heaven, roughly the same thing. But heaven in Confucian thought is not a father, it's not a deity. It's not a personal being who enters into history. It's just a moral order that's embedded in reality. Confucius said that he who offends against heaven has none to whom he can pray. So heaven is structure, legitimacy, it's moral gravity. But now as a practical atheist, that actually felt mature because there was no supernatural theatrics to this. There was no divine incarnation. There was no burning bushes. It was really just ethical clarity. And that's what Confucianism is about. It's about right relationships. It's about the relationship between the ruler and the subject, the father and the son, the husband and the wife, the elder and the younger, friend and friend. Each role functions properly and harmony follows. So in my mind, it sounded like a chain of command that's just being applied to society. And I respect that. But the first question presses deeper because the question of who is God. In Confucianism, if heaven is impersonal order, then morality has structure, but it has no intimacy. There is authority, but no mercy. There's law, but there's no love. Heaven doesn't forgive. Heaven doesn't intervene. Heaven doesn't redeem. It stands there like a standard. And while that can stabilize behavior, it cannot transform the heart. And that tension between that, and that tension would not leave me. I even fell into an emotional trap. I even fell into an intellectual trap because there was a moment in Confucianism where I thought that I had something from Christianity figured out. Because Confucius said, do not impose on others what you do not wish for yourself. And now, century later, it's not until centuries later that Christ says that Christ says later is do unto others as you would have done unto you. And so as an atheist, I saw this and I thought, there it is. Christianity had borrowed something from older wisdom. Ethics evolve. Religions adapt. Nothing is divine here. But then I had to look a little closer because Confucius frames the rule negatively. Do not harm. Do not impose. So what it does is it restrains the wrongdoing. But Christ, when he frames it positively, like actively do good, initiate charity, move first. One of these limits danger, and then the other commands sacrificial love. And that difference is not cosmetic. It is actually a structural part. But Confucianism maintains harmony while Christ demands transformation. And so Confucianism keeps society stable, but Christ changes the interior man. And that disturbed my little neat intellectual dismissal because it suggests that Christianity is not just copying this wisdom. It's radicalizing it, but I wasn't ready at the time to admit that yet. So the next question of who is man in Confucianism, what strikes me about it is not theology. It's actually the anthropology. Confucius believed that man could be formed, not saved, but formed. So the superior man, known as the Junzi, he is cultivated through discipline, through ritual propriety, through education and moral example. And Confucius said, the superior man is modest in his speech, but exceeds in his actions. That line alone would have fit inside a Marine Corps leadership manual because Confucianism assumes something very powerful. That humans are not fundamentally broken. They're just undeveloped. So that problem has nothing to do with corruption at its core. The problem is merely a lack of refinement. And that appealed to me because the soldier, the Marine in me, we don't assume that recruits are depraved. Okay, we assume that they're raw, that you break down the arrogance, you build discipline, you form character. And Confucianism operates the exact same way. Family is just the training ground of virtue. If a son learns reverence towards his father, then he learns reverence towards authority. If a ruler governs with integrity, citizens will follow his lead. Harmony cascades downward from leadership. And Confucius said that to govern is to correct. If you set an example by being correct, who would dare remain incorrect? That was very practical. In fact, I think you could quote that specifically in a Marine Corps leadership principle because it is measurable. It is implementable. And at that stage in my life, I believe that would be enough. But something in my experience still wouldn't let me rest right there because I had seen disciplined men commit evil. I have seen highly structured systems become corrupt. I've seen leaders who understood ethics manipulate them for their own power. So this question had to be pressed harder. If a man is merely unrefined, then why does refinement fail to eliminate evil? So Confucianism assumes moral improvement is achievable through education and ritual. But history itself suggests that knowledge does not eliminate selfishness. Training does not erase pride, and hierarchy does not cure corruption. It's something deeper, but Confucianism doesn't fully address it. So what went wrong? There was no cosmic rebellion in Confucianism. There's no fall. There's no rupture between man and creator. So what went wrong is relational disorder. Fathers stopped leading, sons stopped honoring, rulers stopped governing justly, language itself becomes misaligned, and Confucius famously said, if names are not correct, language is not in accordance with truth. If language is not in accordance with truth, affairs cannot be carried on to success. Perfect. That is absolutely correct. I agree. Because when words are manipulated, society decays. We see that today, that most of us don't trust what we see in the media because words are being manipulated. And titles lose meaning. The authority erodes. That diagnosis resonates today more than ever. But this is also where Confucianism stops short because it describes the breakdown, but it doesn't explain why breakdown is universal. Why does every civilization eventually decay? Why does power consistently drift toward corruption? And why does injustice repeat itself in a different form across centuries? So if man is fundamentally improvable, why does improvement never eradicate moral collapse? Confucianism prescribes moral discipline, but it doesn't confront the possibility that the human heart itself may be disordered at its core. And that distinction really matters. Now, how is it fixed? Confucianism's answer is very consistent. You fix it through cultivation, through ritual, through education, through moral leadership. There is no need for divine intervention. There's no need for any atonement. There's no need for redemption. There is only refinement. And here's where my practical atheism felt affirmed. That this system does not demand any form of worship. It just demands discipline. It doesn't threaten eternal judgment. It demands self-correction. And it doesn't insist that humanity is lost. So it insists that humanity can be trained. And that felt very dignified. But something in me kept asking the question, though, what about guilt? Not social embarrassment, not loss of reputation, guilt. What about evil that cannot be corrected by etiquette? What about crimes that stain the soul? Confucianism never addresses that deeply. It stabilizes civilization, but it doesn't redeem man, and that distinction is impossible to ignore. So now, if Confucianism is ethical structure, then Shinto is sacred atmosphere. Because Confucianism builds order, and then Shinto builds reverence. And historically, these two did coexist. So in Japan, Confucian ethics influenced governance and education, and Shinto shaped sacred identity and ritual life. So one of these would discipline behavior and the other sanctified the culture. And together they formed this civilizational framework. But again, the atheist I was, this was compelling because it seemed to demonstrate that the morality and the meaning could arise without exclusive monotheism. You could have ritual without redemption. You could have reverence without incarnation. And that felt somewhat sophisticated until I had to apply the questions again. Because Shinto is indigenous to Japan. And it's not a systematized theology at all. It's just a way of life. It means the way of the kami. Not kami as in communist, K-A-M-I. And kami are sacred presences. They're not omnipotent creators. They're not eternal sovereign beings outside of existence. They are within creation itself. The mountains, the rivers, the ancestors, the natural forces. One of the central mythic figures is Amaterasu. But even she is not a creator of all that exists. Shinto is not concerned with metaphysical absolutes at all. It's concerned with harmony between humanity and sacred nature. So when you apply the question to Shinto, who is God, there is no singular sovereign creator. There are many, called the kami. And divinity is diffuse. Sacredness saturates the world. And as an atheist, I did find that very attractive because there's no exclusive claims. There's no insistence that all other religions are false. There's no eternal judgment. It's just reverence. But reverence is not sovereignty. Because if divinity is everywhere, nothing governs absolutely. So the first question, it remains incomplete. Because who is God? In Shinto, God is not defined in any ultimate terms at all. Sacredness exists, but authority is dispersed. And of course, dispersed authority cannot ground absolute moral law. So you move to the next question. Who is man? And again, in Shinto, man is not fallen. He becomes impure. And impurity comes through contact with death, blood, and wrongdoing. And the problem is contamination, not rebellion. And purification restores the balance. You wash your hands, you rinse your mouth, you offer prayers, you return to harmony. And that framework feels very gentle because it doesn't accuse humanity of any radical corruption at all. It doesn't burden man with any inherited guilt, but it also softens evil. Because is cruelty just impurity? Is genocide just imbalance? So when you reduce evil to ritual contamination, you diminish when you reduce evil to just ritual contamination, you diminish the gravity of it. And that troubled me because I have seen evil that cannot be washed away with ceremony. So what went wrong? Shinto does not tell a story of any universal rupture at all. Life requires balance. And when balance breaks, ritual restores it. But harmony can coexist with injustice. A society can be ritually pure and morally corrupt. And harmony is not the highest good, though. Truth is. And if truth is violated, ritual cannot repair it. So then how is it fixed? Through purification, through shrine offerings, through reverent practice. And Shinto rituals are very beautiful because they cultivate humility, they preserve identity, but they will not address final judgment because they do not conquer death. They don't offer any reconciliation between a holy creator and a sinful humanity because Shinto does not frame the problem that way. And so that leaves the questions incomplete. And so at this stage, something began to shift in me. Confucianism offered discipline and Shinto offered reverence, and both offered civilization, but neither offered any ultimate rescue. And as a practical atheist, I had to believe religion was social evolution. But now I saw something. If religion is only about stabilizing society, it can produce order, but it cannot answer death. And death is undefeated in every purely civilizational framework because no ritual stops it. No hierarchy escapes it. no refinement will avoid it. If death remains undefeated, then the solution must be deeper than harmony. And that realization began to unsettle my atheism. Because if the problem is deeper than disorder, then the solution has to be deeper than refinement. And there was a moment that I told you about earlier when I thought I had Christianity intellectually cornered, so to speak, because Confucius, 5 centuries before Christ ever said it, do not impose on others what you do not wish for yourself. In the gospel, Christ says in St. Matthew, all things therefore whatsoever you would that men should do to you, do you also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. From Matthew 7:12. And so at first glance, the atheist in me said, there it is. Borrowed ethics. Philosophical recycling. And there it was. And I thought, Christianity's just late to the moral conversation. But that assumption also didn't survive any careful reading at all because, as I said before, Confucius frames the principle negatively. Do not impose, do not harm, restrain yourself. And Christ, on the other hand, frames it positively. All things, therefore, whatsoever you would that men should do to you, do you also to them. That is not restraint. That is command. That's initiative. That's obligation. Confucianism prevents injustice, and Christ commands charity. Confucianism prevents injustice, but Christ commands charity. Confucianism keeps the peace, but Christ requires self-gift. And then he even adds something that Confucius never does. He said, for this is the law and the prophets. So he anchors the command in divine revelation. Not in tradition and not in customs, not in social harmony, divine authority. And that distinction unsettled me again. Because if Christ is merely echoing Confucius, then he's derivative. But if Christ is grounding moral command in divine authority, what he's claiming is something radically different. And Confucius never claimed to fulfill heaven, but Christ did. And that's the moment when my intellectual system began to strain. It didn't collapse dramatically, it tightened. Because Confucianism told me that if men behaved properly, society would stabilize. And Shinto told me that if impurity were cleansed, harmony would return. But I saw something that neither system could explain. And that is, I have seen disciplined men lie. I've seen leaders trained in honor break their word. I had seen men with structure and education and ritual abandon conscience for their own advantage. That is not a lack of etiquette. That is not ritual contamination. That is interior fracture. And once you see that fracture clearly, refinement sounds so thin. Ritual sounds insufficient for that because the problem is not merely social, it's interior. And that is where Christ's words in the Bible began to disturb me in other places. Because even Christ says, for from the heart come forth evil thought. Because he says in Matthew, for from the heart come forth evil thoughts, murderers, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false testimonies, blasphemies. From the heart. Not from lack of training, not from any broken ritual, from the heart. And if that's true, then the problem is deeper than Confucian disorder. It's deeper than Shinto impurity. And if the problem is interior, then the solution must be interior. Not just behavioral, not ceremonial, transformational. And I wish to tell you that realization should have converted me at that time, but it didn't. It just cornered me. So I want to tell you plainly that Confucianism can build order and Shinto can preserve reverence, and both of them can stabilize civilization. But neither of them can conquer death, and neither of them can remove guilt. And neither claims that God entered history, that he suffered and he rose. And so if death remains undefeated, then refinement is insufficient. If guilt remains unresolved, then purification is incomplete. And Christ says one more time in the Bible that no Confucian text and no Shinto ritual dares to say. I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, although he be dead, shall live. That is not harmony, and that is not etiquette. Not ritual balance. That is a confrontation, because either that is true or that is blasphemy. But it is not philosophy. It's a claim about reality. And once that claim enters into the conversation, Confucian refinement and Shinto purification are no longer enough. Because that question is no longer about harmony. It is about resurrection. So, at that stage, something very important happened. I did not run toward Christianity. I ran past it. And the reason why is because from where I was standing at, Christianity looked like a disaster. 45,000 denominations, 40,000 non-denominational churches, every one of them claiming to be the truth, every one of them claiming the Bible, every one of them claiming authority, and no one agreed. So from the outside, it looked like fragmentation. So if Confucianism represented order, Christianity represented division. If Shinto preserved identity, Christianity looked like fracture. And so as a practical atheist, I had zero interest in stepping into what appeared to be a theological civil war. And I remember thinking something very clearly at that point. If this is the one true religion, then why is it so divided? Because if the truth is singular, then why are there thousands of interpretations? Because if Christ founded something, then why does it look like institutional chaos? So I did what any practical atheist would do. I skipped it. I didn't deny it. I just bypassed it. Because when I applied the questions to Christianity at that stage, the answers I got were drowned in noise. Who is God? Yeah, well, every denomination answers it slightly different. Who is man? Different doctrines of sin, different doctrines of grace. So what went wrong? Some emphasize personal choice. Others emphasize inherited corruption. How's it fixed? Faith alone, faith plus works, sacraments, no sacraments, once saved, always saved, maybe not. It looked like theological fragmentation. And I had just studied systems like Confucianism that preserved civilizational continuity for centuries. And looking at Shintoism that maintained sacred identity across generations, and then Christianity from the outside looked like it couldn't even agree with itself. So I moved on. And I went to what seemed intellectually cleaner, the New Age. Because the New Age. Now, why New Age looked attractive at that time is because New Age spirituality didn't claim any exclusive authority. It didn't claim one book. It didn't claim one church. It allowed synthesis. You could borrow some from Buddhism. You could blend it with Hinduism. You could add some personal affirmations. You could adopt meditations. You could reject judgment. There's no hierarchy. There's no final authority. There's no single interpretation to fight over. So it looked very flexible. It looked very modern and peaceful. And to the practical atheist in me, it looked far less chaotic than 45,000 denominations arguing about grace. But here's also what I didn't realize at the time. Flexibility is not the same thing as truth. And unity without authority is not coherence. And the absence of structure doesn't mean the absence of contradiction. But that realization would come later. And at this point in my exploration, Christianity just looked like a mess. And that's why I skipped it. And that decision should also tell you something very important about where I was. I wasn't looking for a cross. I was just looking for coherence. I wasn't looking for surrender. I was looking for intellectual stability. And from the outside, Christianity did not look stable. It looked divided. So I moved on. In the next episode, we're going to step into that world. It's going to be the world of energy, of manifestation, personal divinity. The world where you do not need saving because you are already divine. And we will apply the questions once again. Who is God? Who is man? What went wrong? And how is it fixed? And we will apply the questions to the New Age. Now, we will have to break out the New Age in multiple categories as well, but we can still apply the questions to each of them. Who is God? Who is man? What went wrong? And how's it fixed? Until next time on Veritate, remember this. If you ask, it will be given. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be open unto you. We will continue to ask, seek, and knock. Until next time on Veritate. God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Veritate. If you would like to contact the show, please email us at veritate@yahoo.com. That's veritate@yahoo.com. Thanks again, and we look forward to hearing from you. May God bless you all.